This episode offers psychosocial education designed to inspire and motivate our listeners. The information provided does not constitute a therapeutic relationship nor a substitute for professional mental health care. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, call 911, go to your nearest emergency room, or, for listeners in the United States, text 988 for the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Warning: this episode contains information that will improve emotional and social intelligence. Thanks for tuning in to Harvesting Happiness today for a healthy serving of consciously prepared brain food. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen, your host. Since 2010, we've been broadcasting sound ideas for better well-being. Each week, we spotlight diverse thinkers and doers who are contemporary trendsetters and change agents, devoting their lives to creating a better world. I invite you to listen and change how you think about human happiness. Our award-winning content is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. This episode is part of the Good Citizens Election Season Survival Guide to Restoring Common Sense and Sanity in a Crazy World, produced in collaboration with renowned, fair-minded subject matter experts who provide strategies that enhance critical thinking, increase civic engagement, and foster healthy pleasure to boost personal well-being and relationship satisfaction. You can also discover more unique bonus content at More Mental Fitness by Harvesting Happiness on Substack and Medium. This episode explores human sexuality and is intended for mature audiences. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining me on today's show, where we are exploring intimacy, sexuality, and relationships for a lifetime with my guest, Dr. Cynthia Graham. Dr. Cynthia Graham is a clinical psychologist, senior scientist at the Kinsey Institute, and the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Sex Research. She also serves as a consulting editor of the Journal of Sex and Marital Therapy. A fellow of the Society for the Scientific Study of Sexology, Cynthia is a past president of the International Academy for Sex Research. In 2023, she received the Masters and Johnson Award from the Society for Sex Therapy and Research. Dr. Graham is a maverick in her field researching human sexuality. Welcome, Cynthia. Thanks for joining me on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, I am so excited to talk with you about this subject, because when we talk about people aging and their sexual expression and sexual identities, there's often a stigma, right? As we age, that we sort of shrivel up and dry up and go lay in a corner somewhere, and couldn't be more untrue. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Great. I agree. That's the stereotype.
What are some other myths about sexuality amongst older adults?
I think one of the myths about sexuality among older adults is that sexual function always declines. It's true that sexual problems are more frequent with aging, maybe particularly, probably the evidence stronger for men, but it's not the case that everybody has sexual problems, and it's not the case that the sexual problems can't be dealt with or can't be adapted to. So I think that's another myth, that it's similar to the first one. It's just that people, as they get older, sexuality just becomes a kind of non-starter. And that's, as you said, not the case.
Priorities may change, where we were once driven by sort of the animal in ourselves. It's replaced by perhaps other things or different priority. But is sexual health, it seems to me, it's very much related also to physical health. And if we take care of our bodies and the systems are functioning well, we're going to do better.
That is so true. That there's a lot of research on that. And so we know that people who do have more problems are often in poorer health, both physical health and mental health. So those two things are really closely intertwined. And we also know that older adults now are healthier longer, for the most part, not all, but it depends on accesses and resources and culture and so on too. But absolutely, being in good health makes a big difference to one's sexuality.
Talk a little bit about the cultural element or a cultural influence in this, because I think when we look at sexuality around the world and cultures that are more accepting versus more provincial, and the religious element also in how it affects our sexual practice?
Yeah, that culture that's such an interesting issue. And quite a few years ago, a colleague who's a sex therapist, actually, relationship therapist in New Jersey, and I worked on a book on cultural context of sex therapy. And we invited contributors from around the world, including Africa, Asian countries. And we were really taken aback. But this was a 5-year project, by the way. And the book was published about 10 years ago, roughly 10 years ago. One of the things we found is that in some cultures, it was not acceptable for women to be sexually active anyway. And so in some ways with aging, the focus just became more on being kind of relieved in terms of it was seen as a duty for women and not as anything pleasurable. The other thing that was striking is that in some cultures, there's a real focus on men's sexual problems, and they just ignore women's sexual difficulties. We were quite Catherine Hall and I, Catherine is my colleague who co-edited the book with me, we were taken aback by that. So there are some clinics in some parts of the world that only address erection problems. They don't address anything that women be struggling with. So that was an eye-opener for us, for sure. And yeah, I've worked a little bit in other countries. I did one study in the Philippines many years ago, and there too was kind of taken aback that the instruments, the measurement tools we use, the questionnaires were not appropriate, because there was just such different sexual norms, that asking in some of the cultures about things that we phrase as sexual interest or desire just they weren't appropriate to use in some cultures. Reproduction was really much more important in some cultures as well in terms of sexuality. So with older adults, if reproduction is not part of it, then sometimes sex is kind of given up as well.
So let me ask you another question related to culture and geography. For example, I think of countries like France and Italy, who seem to, or the countries and its people seem to ooze a form of sexuality and comfort in one's own body. And so I know that I can go there as an older person and still feel very vibrant and alive, and that I am still looked at regardless of age.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's been my experience as well.
It feels great.
Well, the study that I worked on recently was done in 6 European countries, and it was funded by Norwegian Research Council. And one of the things we thought we might find were more differences between what we called Southern European and Northern European countries. Now, to be fair, we only had one Southern European country, Portugal. We had Denmark and Norway, Croatia, England, also involved, but we didn't find big differences. This was a big project on sexual health among older adults, involving qualitative interviews, in-depth interviews, and big quantitative survey as well, large numbers, not a small study. And we didn't find very many differences between Portugal, very much Mediterranean, and quite religious country as well, quite Catholic. We didn't find very much in the way of differences.
That's interesting right there, that countries, more Catholic countries who you would think might be more repressive, it didn't align. The data did not align with that, right? They were still quite sexually expressive.
Yeah. And we didn't just find very many differences, particularly in the survey. We didn't have qualitative data from all the countries. We only had it from 2, UK, England, and Croatia. But in the quantitative survey, the differences we expected just weren't there in terms of behavior.
And when you talk about like the Scandinavian countries, that I have memories as a young child going there for a summer and being completely floored as an American kid by the free expression of nudity and sexual pleasure and the normalcy of the whole thing. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I'm sure you know this, but sex education is completely different, right? In the Scandinavian countries. And also in the Netherlands as well, by the way. But sex education starts so much earlier, is really focused on positivity about body. It doesn't start with a lot about sex, but it starts about relationships and body and so on. And I'm sure that that's part of the reason, as you're saying, it carries on. People are more comfortable in later life as well. So yeah, big differences from the US.
A lot to be learned. Let's talk about the media, because the media has a hand in how it portrays us as we age and our sexuality as we age. In some cases, not positive, but things are changing. We're hopeful.
I agree that things are changing in how the media depicts older adults. I will pass on one really interesting finding I had a PhD student, Lauren Towler, who worked with me on the older adult project. And they were very in-depth interviews, just 31 adults. She was able to recruit older adults, so people who were in their 80s and even 90s, from my memory. And one of the things she found is that the women in particular talked about things were changing in the media, but they didn't think that a lot of the depictions of some of the older women in the media were very realistic. So they applauded the attention in the media, but they also highlighted that some of the people who were in the media, some of the actresses, for example, it was a little bit unrealistic. And they wanted to see more realistic images of older people in the media, which is interesting.
You mean like Martha Stewart in a bikini kind of thing?
Exactly.
I mean, kudos to her. She does look fabulous, but it's not the average woman of her age.
Exactly. They brought up others as well. I'm going to probably forget, but
Helen Mirren.
They brought up Helen Mirren. Yes.
She's a knockout. I mean, total knockout. Sophia Loren.
Yes. And they did bring up her too. So that was something that more than a few people mentioned. We thought that was interesting. But I agree, it's changing. It's definitely changing for the better, but it could go a lot further, I think.
What about the changes that men and women experience in terms of our sexual functioning as we age? And you mentioned that not everything goes, but things do change, right? Like the ability to obtain or maintain an erection, or lubrication in a woman, or even desire, libido. Those things change.
They absolutely. And the first two you mentioned, erectile function and lubrication, they'd be the most common as well, right? For men and then for women. But there are things you can do, right, about both.
Yes.
So part of it is education about that, and not thinking that, as someone who I used to do sex therapy for about 30 plus years, I don't anymore. But one of the things that I remember was we're seeing people who were they were not older adults, really. They were middle-aged adults, but they were experiencing some changes in sexual function, and they reacted really catastrophically, some of the clients that I saw, to that. So part of it's about normalizing, right? Yes, there are changes. And going back to the older adult project that we did in Europe, a lot of the couples said, yes, things have changed. And now what we do is we focus on things in a little bit differently. We don't focus as much on penetrative sex. We focus more on other genital but non-penetrative sex. And I think there's still a real role for education, right? In knowing there are other things. I mean, Viagra is useful for many men, but there are other things that can be done as well. And a lot of it is really just about knowledge about changes with sexuality and sexual function with aging.
I was going to say about also the psychology behind sex, right? That it's more than just a physical function. And if you are worried about paying your mortgage, if you're worried about the future of your country, if you're worried about geopolitical situations, that is not exactly an invitation to get it on, right? Like it does sort of dampen the libido. So my working hypothesis is if we have more sex, we'll be less angry and have better critical thinking to work through our problems.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't think about how much the psychological factors affect. And one of the things that I have always struggled with is that some of the research on trying to develop a drug, right, to treat women's low sexual desire, which has been going on for some time, 2 drugs have been approved, is if you read a lot of the research and listen to hearings at the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, you hear people thinking that nothing should affect sexuality, that we should, that it should be the same as when we first met someone in the first week of having sex. And that's unrealistic, but it's also not a bad thing, because, things actually can improve quality. in our study of older adults, we found that in the qualitative work we did, some older adults said that, and they said, actually, things are better now. We're able to communicate better, which is so important.
Yes.
And the biggest predictor in one study I worked on in the UK, a nationally representative survey, biggest predictor of low sexual desire was not being able to communicate likes and dislikes about sex with your partner. That was the biggest predictor.
Isn't that everything? The quantum is the communication, whether it's in the bedroom or outside of it. It's the communication is key.
Yeah. And that is not something I think that people think about. And younger people have, it's a learning process, right? To be able to do.
Yes.
Absolutely. And a lot of young people don't feel comfortable doing that. Women in particular, I think still.
Let's take a break. And then when we come back, we will continue the conversation with my guest today, Dr. Cynthia Graham. To learn more, please visit the KinseyInstitute.org. On X, Facebook, and Instagram, go to @Kinsey Institute. Here comes the pause. We'll be right back. Wait. Before we pause, let's talk about stress. Let's face it, if we are alive, we will experience stress, and stress impacts our health and happiness. In today's fast-paced world filled with challenges and pressures, stress is a common denominator that affects everyone and can undermine our well-being. Chronic and unmanaged stress can lead to cardiovascular problems, a weakened immune system, digestive issues, sleep disturbances, mental health issues, poor weight regulation, musculoskeletal issues, memory and concentration issues, and so much more. What if the answer to a better stress response is in a key nutrient? I'm talking about magnesium, specifically Magnesium Breakthrough by Optimizers. This one-of-a-kind full-spectrum magnesium product is designed to reverse low levels of magnesium, which can contribute to a variety of health problems. What sets Magnesium Breakthrough apart is its ability to support healthy stress hormone levels, stress response, and the healthy production of GABA, the relaxing neurotransmitter that leads to a more peaceful and calm state of being. Magnesium Breakthrough acts like a brake on our body's nervous system by helping to quiet, soothe, and promote balance. But we need to have the right kind of magnesium to do the job. There are 7 key forms of magnesium, and we must get all of them to experience its calming, stress-balancing benefits. Most magnesium supplements use only the 2 cheapest synthetic forms. That's why I use and highly recommend Magnesium Breakthrough by Optimizers. It's the only organic full-spectrum magnesium supplement that includes those 7 unique forms of magnesium for stress resilience and better sleep, all in one bottle. Nourish your mind and body with this all-natural, full-spectrum magnesium supplement. Optimizers Magnesium Breakthrough is a game changer. Go to buyoptimizers.com/happiness and use promo code happiness during checkout to save 10%. Subscribe to receive great discounts, free gifts, and a monthly supply delivered to your door. And if you're not happy, there is a 365-day money-back guarantee. Check it out at buyoptimizers.com/happiness and use code happiness. Your mind and body will thank you. Let's take that break. We'll be right back. Harvesting Happiness is rooted in science. Our work facilitates applied positive psychology practices through media and consulting. We're committed to sound ideas for better well-being, leading to increased life satisfaction and a better world for everyone. We're not into pseudoscience or quick fixes. We're all about using common sense backed by rigorous research. Healthy critical thinking is the foundation for our discussions. We encourage you to challenge preconceptions and explore ideas with a curiously discerning mind. Our collaboration is united by an inclusive vision that boosts resilience, critical thinking, communication, and problem-solving through civilized discourse and pleasurable relational engagement for everyone. Visit harvestinghappiness.com for psychosocial and educational services that boost emotional and social intelligence. This episode explores human sexuality and is intended for mature audiences. And we're back, but before we get back to it, let's talk about human desire and banishing bedroom boredom. Yep, life is stressful, and engaging in a little adult playtime can be good for the mind, body, and soul. I know. Sometimes it's hard to feel in the mood when life demands so much of us. Whether it's work, kids, elder care, or other important obligations, finding the time and headspace for mind-boggling pleasure can be a challenge. But one thing is never ending, our right to learn, explore, and care about our intimate well-being. The good news is that with a little curiosity, interest, and effort, more rousing, intimate relations can be yours at any age or stage of life. Today's sponsor, Beducated, has created a judgment-free online platform that has helped tens of thousands of people find their sexual happiness. Beducated has more than 100 online sex and relationship courses led by the world's top experts that will help you master new techniques to enjoy more sex with greater confidence and new depths of pleasure. No matter your age, gender, sexual orientation, relationship preference, or sexual experience, Beducated is a safe and discreet, judgment-free resource for folks wanting to nurture themselves and banish bedroom boredom. Recently, we took a very interesting course entitled Sexperiments for Couples that teaches how to get out of a sexual rut through mindset, communication, and technique to reignite that spark and connection. Whether you want to refine your bedroom skills with titillating tools or be more at home in your own body, visit beducate.me/September40 to learn more. Spice up your love life today at beducate.me/September40 and use code HAPPINESS to get 40% off the yearly pass. You can even test the waters with a free 24-hour trial. And if you're not satisfied, there is a 14-day risk-free money-back guarantee. That's beducate.me/September40 and code HAPPINESS. Now let's get back to the conversation. And we're back talking with Dr. Cynthia Graham about intimacy, sexuality, and relationships for a lifetime. Let's return to the conversation. Okay, Cynthia, I want to just tell you or share with you something that a friend of mine who's a gynecologist has told me. And the first thing he always says to me is it's for women, desire is between their ears. It's not between their legs, which makes me laugh always. And then the other thing he says is that women are like ovens and men are like microwaves, which also makes me laugh. But I think you might think differently because it gets into the mythology.
I do think differently about that, but it is something that is still presented a lot at conferences that I go to as well. There's one image that people use that I've seen so many times, which sort of presents women's sexual desire as a piece of equipment with all kinds of buttons and dials and lights and everything. And then they show one of men, which is one dialed button. That's all.
Oh, that's not nice.
No, it's not. I think men's sexuality is often oversimplified as being pretty straightforward, and it's not. And one of the things that I think a lot of people might be surprised about is there's a lot more research on women's experiences of desire and arousal. There's a lot of research on men's sexual functioning, yes, but in terms of their subjective feelings, it's growing, and it's particularly growing among older men, which is great to see. But there's still the idea, I think, that it's all about erections, right? It's all about, and I think the research doesn't really bear that out, the research that we do have on men's sexuality.
Well, tell us more. You've piqued my interest.
Yeah, I mean, years ago, we did a study here in Bloomington, linked to the Kinsey, of factors that enhance and inhibit women's sexual desire. And it was a big study, 9 focus groups of women aged from 18 to over 80, I think it was 82. And a few years later, my colleague who was at the Kinsey here for 20 years, Eric Jansen, did a similar study on men, about 7 or 8 focus groups. So again, quite a lot of qualitative data. And he found in that study that the factors that men reported as enhancing or inhibiting their sexual arousal and desire were very similar, actually. And we're more focused on relationships and mood and things that I think they were surprised that the male researchers doing the study. And there just isn't enough research on men's sexual desire. And a good example of how that is problematic is if you look at the classification of sexual problems or dysfunction it's called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, things haven't changed much in the last 10 years with the last edition because there wasn't enough research to back up changes for men, whereas there was for women. And so we made big changes for women moving, things away from a focus on the genitals. But for men, it didn't change very much, because any change we introduced had to be backed up by research. And so I still think there's a tendency for a lot of research on men to focus on ejaculation and erection, right?
And penetration too.
And penetration,
yeah.
Absolutely. I'm not saying those are unimportant for men, but I think that the factors that affect their arousal and the desire are really multifaceted and just as broad as for women, really.
So when we talk about arousal, I have often been told that, and read that for men, it's about what they see, and for women, it's about what they hear. Is that accurate or more mythology?
I think it's more mythology. I think it is. I've heard that as well, often. And there's this, here's another myth about sexuality. There's a myth around that men are much more aroused by visual erotic stimuli. And so films, for example, and the lab, the research really doesn't bear that out. And in the studies that I used to be involved, not anymore, in doing lab-based studies, we're bringing people in and assessing their responses. We didn't find that women had any problem becoming aroused to sexually explicit and erotic films. There were differences in preferences between men and women.
That makes sense.
There were, and we did one study that really showed that of younger, it was of younger individuals. But it's not the case, I don't think, that women are more aroused by, audio stimuli, if you like. There's good research on women's responses to visual stimuli. Pretty strong evidence.
And I think the pornography industry has also evolved. There are many more women who are writing,
Absolutely.
Directing, producing these films that appeal to a female audience.
Yes, there's a lot more on that. And I remember when I started doing a long time sexuality research, there were one or two women directors. I still remember the name of women-centered pornography, it was called. It's much better now in terms of, there's also, just a little aside, there's also been a real lack of research on women's experiences of pornography use themselves, for them watching pornography. That's changing as well.
You mean alone, as a
alone or with a partner, both.
Okay.
Yeah. But just in the last, I'd say certainly only 10 years, there's starting to be more and more research. It's really growing on women's experiences of using pornography. Which is great to see, actually, because it was really neglected.
That's interesting. I mean, is there any research data that you can share?
Actually. My PhD students, Katerina Litsu, who's just finished her PhD in England. She's just got 2 papers just published on women's experiences of pornography use. As I said, there's not very much, so it's difficult to make really broad conclusions. But I mean, women use pornography for a huge variety of reasons, some of them sexual, some of them non-sexual, like to get to sleep. And
wow.
Yeah, and out of boredom and stuff. So, and the nice thing about this research that's coming out, and there's quite a few different researchers in different countries doing this research on women's experiences, is it's quite positive. So it's not focused on problematic pornography use. It's focused on women using pornography. I mean, they looked at problematic use, but for the most part, women report actually, they realize that the porn depicted, the sexuality depicted in porn rather, is not realistic. But they still often find that it helped their body image and it made them feel more empowered, is the word that in her studies. She's done some really pretty cool research, one survey of over 3,000 women, another in-depth interview study of about 30 women as well. And she's still working on her papers from her thesis, but it's a growing area for sure, pornography use among women.
So to take that a little bit further, and problem use of pornography by gender, yes. Is a woman less or equally or more likely to have a problem or an addictive tendency towards pornography than a man?
I don't think we really can answer that question, but I will just say one thing. There's a lot of debate in the area about whether or not there is such a thing as porn addiction, right? There's problematic use. People have problems. Some people have problems using porn, but there's a real debate in the literature about whether it's really an addiction. and whether or not that term in particular is highly debated. Whether
That's
women
fascinating.
have problems, yeah. There is one kind of consistent find, and this isn't my area, but I know the research pretty well because of the journal that I edit when we get a lot of submissions on pornography. One of the things seems to be that it depends a lot on whether or not the pornography is hidden from a partner or whether it's shared. And
that makes sense.
It really does. And so in the student I just mentioned, her research, when pornography was watched with a partner, that tended to be associated with higher sexual satisfaction, not lower. But if it was solo use that was hidden from a partner, it was a whole different thing. And so actually really like deceiving a partner or certainly not sharing that they watch porn, that doesn't seem to have a great impact on relationships, which makes sense.
I think hiding any activity, like probably any activity, would not have a positive impact on a relationship, right? That we should feel good about our conduct.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
I love talking about all of this data, and we've nearly out of time for this episode. And I want to invite our listeners to head on over to our Substack for a continuation of this conversation, because we're going to get into the KI CURT, which is known as the Kinsey Institute Condom Use Research Team, which is a 25-year-old project that you've got lots of data that you're going to share with us, and the importance of condom use in the dating world as we age. So we're going to explore that. Dr. Cynthia Graham, thank you for joining us on this episode. We're going to continue the conversation over on the other side. To learn more, please visit kinseyinstitute.org. And you can find the Kinsey Institute on social media, on X, Facebook, and Instagram at Kinsey Institute. Cynthia, thanks for spending part of your day with me.
It was a pleasure, real pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on Harvesting Happiness today. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen on behalf of my guest, Dr. Cynthia Graham, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day. Remember to be kind to one another, and don't forget to register and vote. Keep harvesting your happiness anytime and anywhere from the comfort of wherever you are. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable Harvesting Happiness episodes from wherever you get your podcasts. Connect with and follow us on most social media channels. To learn more about lifestyle management and mental fitness services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Harvesting Happiness and More Mental Fitness are produced by Lisa Cypers Kamen, Andrea Mengele, Robin Boyd, Andrea Daly, and our fantastic team at Podfly Productions, including Eric Begay, Kimberly Beck, and Alec Guess. In collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU, RadioMalibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.